Welcome to Leadership Works, the podcast focused on leadership in our challenging world. Now introducing your host, Dr. John Bedker, a leader, practitioner, and a scholar. It's a pleasure to have everyone on the Leadership Works podcast.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Dr. John Bedker, your host for the Leadership Works podcast. Well, we're several episodes into the podcast now. I just want to take a quick moment in the introduction here and say thank you. Our readership, our listenership is increasing. I really have gotten some great comments. I appreciate it. I always appreciate feedback. And so let me just say thank you. It's so important and it's so vital, and thanks to all of you. Okay, let's begin. Today is the third in a series of podcasts on the country of Belarus, a country that I had the great pleasure and honor to spend some time in along with my wife as the U.S. Fulbright Scholar to Belarus. So I do have some firsthand experience, some firsthand knowledge. I've shared that in some earlier episodes of this series, but I'll just mention that as a quick recap. Today, this third in the series is about the leader himself, Lukashenko, President Alexander Lukashenko. We're going to talk about Lukashenko and leadership. Now, putting these words in the same sentence might sound somewhat mutually exclusive. How can we use that word Lukashenko, the president, and leadership in that same sentence? Well, that is the problem. That is the challenge, and that is the purpose of this episode. So we're going to talk about it. But let's go back to the beginning. I think it's so important to revisit and revisit and revisit again, what is leadership in its pure, in its basic, fundamental, essential understanding? Well, I've often stated that leadership is both simple and extraordinarily difficult. It is. Simple because it boils down to doing the right thing. Now, many of you would say, that's simple, that's straightforward. But unfortunately, it can also be extraordinarily difficult. So simple, right, to do the right thing, but at times extraordinarily difficult. Done regularly, though, this doing the right thing can become a habit. And yes, it can be simple. I think it's always better to keep things simple. And yes, things can happen if you don't choose that simple path, the straightforward path, the path of doing the right thing. Well, unfortunately, that's what this episode is about, a person who chose the other path, the path of President Alexander Lukashenko. Well, when you choose that other path, it does become more difficult, as I've said. Remember, position, rank, title, so many of these descriptors, these are not leadership. Again, these are not leadership. But such is the case of the President of Belarus. Relies heavily, one would say exclusively, on that position, on the rank, on the title. In a previous episode, I spoke about the Constitution in Belarus and quoted some of the features of it. The Constitution of Belarus provides for certain liberties, certain rights. The right to vote, as an example. But, as I stated in a previous podcast, but let's emphasize here, elections in Belarus are neither free nor fair. So I've spoken about this before, but it bears I think, repeating. Lukashenko has chosen this other path where diligence and awareness, important leadership core competencies, are disregarded. Wouldn't it be quicker and easier to cut the corner, use a metaphor, to not invest the time, the energy, or other resources when you could just make a statement? So herein lies the Constitution of Belarus. But then the president, because of their position and title, chooses to make subsequent statements that these rights, these interests, can be superseded and will be superseded for the best interests of the state, for the best interests of the country, the best interests of Belarus. Well, who's determining all these best interests? Well, is Lukashenko diligently seeking to gain awareness of the needs and interests of the people of Belarus? What are their desires? What's their will? No, he is not. The president of Belarus, Lukashenko, seeks to advance his own agenda, his own needs, his own desires. Not those of the people he was, in quotes here now, elected to serve. Now, as I've mentioned in an earlier episode of this series, it's been many years since there's been a free and fair election in Belarus. This path to becoming the last remaining dictator in Europe has been purposeful. It is intentional. It is focused on power, control, greed, and ultimately Alexander Lukashenko's self-interests, not the interests of the people of Belarus. And while the story, I hope, is both clear and compelling, it's really a cautionary tale for those of us in the United States. We in America are confronted by, again, this word in quotes, leaders, certainly government leaders, but also faith leaders, seeking to advance their own agendas. Self-motivated, power and control, driven and increasingly not representative of those they were ostensibly to serve. We see in Belarus the endgame. A leader who is not a leader. A position and a title, but absent the core motivations or intent to do the right thing. Justification, what we call spin in the United States, is given to justify his judgment and decision-making, both of which are exclusionary of the desires, need, interests, or the will of the people of Belarus. Is the U.S. headed in a similar direction? That's the question. Unfortunately, the simple answer today is yes. We are already questioning our elections. We're already making overtures by groups of people, Americans, that the elections were not free nor fair. Misinformation, disinformation, in fact lying, are much more present today in the United States. Whether we look at gun control, women's rights, the sexual abuse of children by priests, and sadly, other important and significant departures from historically American norms, values, and beliefs. Well, this is where Lukashenko began, to make the analogy. And look at where he has gone. Look where it has brought the country of Belarus and the people of Belarus. The leader has not been a leader. The will of the people, the interests of the people, the opportunity to elect those that would lead them have all been disrupted, and in some cases denied, because Lukashenko, this last remaining dictator in Europe, has determined that it is his will, his needs, and his interests that need to prevail. So, what do we learn in our leadership journeys? Well, we have to go back to the fundamentals, right? Do the right thing. Well, what is that right thing? What do we do, right? Do we really and truly believe that a free and fair election is possible in the United States? Well, I hope resoundingly the answer is yes, we do. Do we believe that we have them? Well, the majority absolutely do. But there is a vocal, a loud minority that says no. What we call in our news now the big lie. There are those among us who are committed to a belief, an understanding that we had neither a free nor a fair election in 2020 in the United States. Patently untrue, proven to be untrue. Recounts, audits, lawsuits, testimony from many, many people. And yet, we have a group of people who believe that is the case. Well, similarly with faith leaders, we have a clericalism issue. Again, I've spoken about these things previously, that the sexual abuse of children in the Catholic Church, but in other churches as well, is present and is abhorrent. But yet, we would show great deference to those people that sit or stand in a pulpit and preach to us, to try to represent faith. And certainly the issue recently about women's rights, a woman's right to choose. Well, we have 5 justices in the United States Supreme Court who sit in this building that says equal justice under the law. We have this Constitution that says that all people are created equal, and yet we have this quite unequal system of justice. Similarly, in our Constitution, we say that well-regulated militias rightfully can be armed for our protection and to ensure that there is not a repeat of those things that happened in other countries which caused people to come to the United States to begin with. But we now have a pervasive gun culture. And again, court cases, not the Constitution, but court cases that say It's okay. Who we are, our identity. If you ask people, do you in fact want to feel unsafe going into a grocery store, a movie theater, a place of worship? We've had mass shootings in all of these and many more. Schools. Holy cow. Well, this move to advancing individuals' agenda is not leadership. It is, in fact, autocracy. The move to have people challenge the elections is not democracy. To only be satisfied when the election results in the way that they want it to occur, not in what the will of the people, the voice of the people indicated. This move toward autocracy is a move from democracy. And in the case of Lukashenko, we see clearly what that future portends. If leaders do not serve the needs and the interests of their citizens, of those they are elected to serve, whether you're a faith leader, a government leader, whatever, it is not, let me emphasize this, it is not a matter of politics. It is a matter of leadership. And simply, it is a matter of doing the right thing. So this third episode, we talk about the President of Belarus, a person with position and title, but not a leader. We are not trying to make an equivalency at all, but rather a depiction of what the removal of the will of the people, the removal of free and fair elections, the removal of human rights, civil rights, what that possibly could portend. And I think the message is both clear and compelling when we look at the case of Belarus. Today they sit with the last remaining dictator in Europe, a person who is siding with Putin on the invasion of Ukraine, that seems justified in bringing nuclear weapons into the country of Belarus, and to incarcerate those that would object, to either incarcerate or eliminate those that might seek to have a voice to say, why don't we do the right thing? And that right thing is not only denied, but has incredible consequences. We do not want to be in that position. One day, any day, in the United States. So as leaders, we must learn the lessons that we observe from others, so that we remain a free, fair, and open society led by people motivated to serve the needs and interests of each and every one of us. Okay, so a bit of a 30,000-foot view of Lukashenko, but with direct application to the current events in the United States, the course and direction, particularly as we approach the midterms and look forward to our 2024 presidential election in the United States. Lots to be thinking about, lots to learn, lots to be aware about. Remember, leaders, situational awareness and position awareness, we're all challenged to do that each and every day. All right, everyone, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you had a good week. See you next time. Take care.
Thank you all for tuning in. We sincerely hope you will tune in again to the Leadership Works podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends. And, of course, we hope you will subscribe and be a regular listener. Again, thank you for tuning in to the Leadership Works podcast. Have a great day.